Welcome to Timbo Talks, a weekly podcast about work and play. I'm your host, Tim. Today I'm talking with my friend and expert on the gaming industry, Phid McAwesome. Phid,
Hey,
welcome.
nice to join you, dude. Expert on the gaming industry. It's actually fun. I don't like using that word for some reason, and I think it's just the old imposter syndrome.
Right, so what sounds better, expert on the gaming industry or gaming industry expert? That's a trick question.
Gaming industry expert. I don't know. Yeah. I think I suffer a real lot from the whole imposter syndrome side of things as well. It's like when people say, "Oh, he's an expert on," I just, "Oh, there's way more that I can know, so I'm not an expert."
Right, do you think that's a reflection of the fact
I
that...
think it's a personal reflection, to be honest, on
Oh,
myself.
okay.
Yeah, it's just a I struggle with there's this term I use called wankery,
Can you
and
please
especially
explain that term?
so okay, like I hate I personally hate corporate wankery, and I sometimes feel like when you start calling yourself an expert or blah 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 and something that you're being a real corporate wanker about things or just being a real wanker about yourself or whatever. And I think by keeping yourself grounded and sort of saying, well, I'm not an expert, there's always more that I can learn.
Well, that's very humble.
Yeah.
How do you refer to yourself, though, your
Um,
profession?
it really depends on who I'm talking to. I sort of say that I'm a co-founder and general manager in the gaming industry or a marketer in the gaming industry. But if I'm talking to somebody that is potentially going to be a client or something, I definitely use, oh, I'm a
Yeah, I was...
gaming industry specialist, or I'm
Right.
I used to say I was an influencer marketing specialist.
I do like the term specialist. I
Yeah,
was reluctant to use the term marketer, not that I have anything against marketers. It's just when I think of you, okay, you work in marketing
yeah,
games, game publishers, but you are a specialist because you have a long history with games. And
yeah. I
I,
think specialist is probably the term that I'm more comfortable with.
okay. Well,
Yeah,
we'll use the term specialist because I need a specialist to discuss how I'm feeling because I just finished watching a great Netflix show. It was a 6 episode show called High
ah,
Score. No
high
doubt
score. Yeah,
you've
yeah.
seen it.
I actually binge watched it the night it came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, watched the entire 6 episodes back to back.
Well, I had quite an intense emotional reaction to it, so I spread it out. I probably spread it out over a week, and
Yeah,
I, I was actually surprised once the first episode was underway. I was sort of surprised the emotions that were bubbling up because I felt this intense, sentimental longing
yeah,
for the past, which, the technical name for that is nostalgia. Did,
yes.
did you have similar feelings?
Okay, look, a big part of what I do involves nostalgia to a certain degree as well. Nostalgia it's almost a drug.
Right.
I
That's
think it's almost a
interesting.
drug and I think it's because like as older people, like as we start getting older, like a lot of our fond memories are as teenagers or as in our youth, you know. So the small things that we can sort of connect back to that brings this sort of happy endorphin sort of feeling to you. Like I can remember, like if you for the people on the audio podcast, like my background is literally old Ataris and Nintendos and Segas and stuff. So nostalgia is a big part of me as well. I can remember buying back a Sega Mega Drive. I would have been in my early 20s, and Sega Mega Drive was sort of the console that I loved when I was a kid. And when I held that in my hands and bought it, and I think Street Fighter 2 was the game I bought with it. It was like this feeling of, oh, this is my childhood. Yeah.
Oh, really? You actually felt that at the time?
Yeah. Felt like that machine, that box in my hand was like the epitome of my childhood. Because I would honestly say, if I wasn't at school, I was sitting at home playing Mega Drive.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Street Fighter 2, you are obviously a serious gamer because I remember the Mega Drive. I remember one of my friends from high school inviting me over to his house. And maybe it was his birthday, maybe it was Christmas, I can't remember, but his parents had just bought him a Mega Drive. He's like, Tim, check this out.
Yeah.
And he put this game on, and it was this crazy little blue spiky character zipping around the
So
screen like a cannonball. And like,
yeah.
for those who have know what I'm talking about or who have watched the Netflix series High Score, that character Sonic, that was really their response to, I guess it was Mario, was
It
it?
was definitely the response to Mario. So they had attempted to utilize a couple of different characters as their mascot, if you will, and it just never sort of hit. But the thing is, with Nintendo, and still to this day, you think Nintendo, if you were going to sum Nintendo up in one image, it is usually Mario.
Of course.
Yeah, and they never had that. Sega just didn't have that. They tried it with Alex Kidd in the 80s, and Alex Kidd just, I don't know. I think it was a fun game, but it just wasn't something that you would love to have on a T-shirt or a coffee mug or whatever, or on your lunchbox as a kid. Whereas Mario was cool, and Sega
Yeah,
never had a Mario.
definitely. It's interesting when you were talking about your experience with the Mega Drive and you're saying you're literally holding your childhood in your hands. I don't want to date myself too much for this conversation, but I literally remember going into an arcade as
Mm.
a really small child. For people who don't know what that is, you actually had to go somewhere to play
It's
video games
an,
and put
an actual shop that had big machines that
yeah, and
each
you
machine had one game on it.
and you yes, and you would put coins in it. And the
uh,
fellow who created Atari, that was sort of his innovation. If
Nolan,
like
Nolan
Nolan,
Bushnell.
Nolan
He's a
Bushnell.
really nice guy.
Oh, you've met him.
Oh, dude. Hey, so I used to have my own, like, well before I moved to Australia, my wife and I and a friend of ours had a podcast network. So we had like 6 or 7 podcasts that were always on the go at once. And I started my own podcast doing retro gaming interviews and stuff like that with another friend as a part of that. And this sort of shows how long I've been in the gaming industry. So we got to talk with Nolan, got to talk with a few of the guys from Sega from back in the day, like Al Nilsson, who was the marketing exec at Sega in the early 90s. He's an awesome guy. Yeah, the voice of Super Mario, we got to have him on the show. And
Oh,
all
really?
that. So, yeah, all of these cool guys. But Nolan, really nice dude. Very much knows how important he is to the gaming industry. But
Right.
yeah, nice dude.
So
Smart.
he's like the elder statesman of the gaming industry, would you say?
Oh, one of.
One
He's
of.
probably the elder statesman that's still left. So
Right.
there's an argument about, is he the father of video games because he was the first successful console and first massive successful arcade machine,
Right.
or is it Ralph Baer who invented the brown box,
So
which is
you're
arguably
referring to
the
the
first console?
2600. Is that what you're referring to?
No. The brown box is the went on to become the Magnavox Odyssey.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
well, you truly are a specialist because you are referring to video game artifacts like Indiana Jones lecturing his students about some
Yeah.
lost piece of treasure or something. Yeah, just going back to Mario, I think it was one of the plumbers. Was it Mario who was a character in Donkey Kong?
Yeah, Mario was originally Jumpman, his name was.
Ah,
And he was the character that you played as in Donkey Kong that was trying to get up the levels to get to the big gorilla,
yeah.
Donkey Kong
So
himself. Yeah.
when I fell in love with arcade games, I think Space Invaders was reaching the end of its life. My memory's vague, but those machines were monochrome, as in black and white, the graphics. The first ones anyway, but Donkey Kong, it was colourful. It was very appealing for a child. And then
Yeah.
you had Pac-Man and all sorts of games after that. But there was just something magical about going to the arcade with a pocket full of change
Oh, definitely there
and
was.
seeing how long that would last. And it's interesting, nostalgia, it's the emotional connection to happy childhood experiences, as you were saying. But, not all my childhood experiences were happy and some of it was dark, but you can still have a sense of nostalgia for those little
Yeah,
pockets of
and and
happiness.
I can
Yeah,
definitely relate to that as well.
right.
And I think it's why we sort of have these positive emotions towards things like video games, is because that there's a section of our childhood that was nothing but joy.
Right.
So
Okay.
people also have that same sort of, and it's a full on. There's a chemical reaction, and people have it to food a lot, like especially like snack foods and stuff. Like I remember talking to somebody from Australia not long after I moved here, and I mentioned Dunkaroos and the smile that came on that person's face, and you could sort of see the memory that they had about Dunkaroos as a kid. Yeah,
So
and people.
is that a New Zealand biscuit, is it?
No, it's an Australian food that we had in New Zealand. It's a
Ah,
biscuit that you dip into like a chocolate sauce that came with it.
right. Okay.
But yeah, seeing this person have the same sort of emotional reaction to food. People have it with food. Music's another one that is big on
Very powerful. Yeah.
nostalgia. Very powerful,
Yeah,
and that one's a big one because most people attach memories to music.
of course. Points in their life.
Yeah.
Like, it's really interesting nostalgia from a marketing point of view. I read a marketing article today by a gentleman called Mark Schaefer. Shout out to Mark, where he said, I think we're about to enter a boom time for emotion laden products. And he was talking about, there was another show on Netflix. It's like about the Karate Kid or something.
Oh, Cobra Kai.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but he thought it wasn't very good, but that wasn't the point of his article. The point of his
Yeah.
article was it's actually popular because, people of a certain age remember the Karate
Yeah.
Kid movie.
Yeah, I 100% agree on what he's saying too, because have a look at almost all facets of media at the moment. It is what is old is almost new again. Like things are coming back. Like look at Full House coming back on Netflix. It is not a good show now, and it wasn't a good show then. But it's a nostalgia thing, right? I heard the other day that Saved by the Bell's coming back.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, and it's another TV show from our childhoods that is coming back, and apparently, like the characters from then are going to be like school teachers and parents and stuff of the new cast. You've got movies like Bill and Ted's 3 coming up this week.
Yeah, I didn't see a trailer, but I just saw the title. I was like,
Mm.
really? Wow, a third Bill and Ted.
Yeah, and who would have thought that that was going to happen? Apparently, it's not a good movie once again, but I know I will go and see it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's interesting though, because critics of nostalgia, they paint nostalgia as like a bad thing. Maybe it's infantile or you're looking backwards instead of forwards. But when you feel that feeling of nostalgia, it's not a bad feeling. Like
Oh, it's,
how could something so good that feels so good actually be bad? Like I
oh,
suppose
mate,
chocolate and sweets are nice to eat, but you don't want to eat them all the
I
time.
know,
But
I know plenty of weed smokers that will agree with you 100%. But yeah, you're right. I don't see how it can be a bad thing, and I mean, especially in our industry as well, when it comes to marketing and whatnot. Doesn't matter what you're marketing, if you can attach something positive like nostalgia to it, people are going to react to it. To look exactly like at the video game industry at the moment, we are seeing old games having a resurgence. Nintendo have released in the last 3 or 4 years 2 retro consoles. They re-released the NES as the NES Mini, the Super Nintendo as the Super Nintendo Mini. Sega released the Genesis and Mega Drive Minis as well. But Microsoft, who owns the rights to a whole heap of titles that used to be on the Nintendo because they bought Rare, who was the software company that made the games, have re-released like games like Battletoads and stuff in the last year, which were old, really old Nintendo games. They've re-released them as new Xbox games.
oh, really?
Yeah,
So
and it's all nostalgia. And once again, I don't even think they have to be good. I think they have to live up to some sort of resemblance of the memory that we have. But
So
yeah,
there,
as long
there may have been something we disliked. Like, for instance, there was a really old game called Frogger, which is a classic arcade game.
yeah,
But like, I hated that game because its level of difficulty just stressed me out. But I'm
yeah,
sure there are people out there who are Frogger
that love it.
aficionados, and
Yeah.
to play that again, they'll get the nostalgia kick. So is with nostalgia, is it the case that, one person's trash is another person's treasure?
Oh, definitely, mate. Definitely. It is definitely a niche some at times when they re-release these things. But then you have things as well where people are cashing in 100% on nostalgia, and it isn't successful. And an interesting one at the moment is Atari getting ready to release the Atari VCS globally. It's a brand new console.
All
Brand
right.
new console, looks like a modernized version of the 2600. It's basically a watered down PC though, so it'll play any PC games, and I think it can play some Android games, um, as well as have its own console games. Only issue is it's an $899 Australian console.
Yeah, you'd get a good PC for that price.
Exactly, or the new PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are both going to be roughly around that same price. So, are you going to invest in something that is 100% nostalgia and not a great product? Or are you going to invest in the new console, which will probably be able to play, um, will probably eventually have a lot of retro games available on it as well? Like, because most Xbox and PlayStation both have like classic games and their downloadable games.
Right. So nostalgia, it can actually backfire on you if,
I think if
but
you bank too hard on it, yeah.
yeah, I mean, people could look at what you're doing and then start to go, well, this is a cynical exercise because you're actually you're trying to drain me of my funds just from
Yeah.
nostalgia.
Well, the funny thing was when they announced the Atari VCS in Australia, we started monitoring the sentiment online. Purely, this is purely out of my own curiosity because I personally thought when I saw it, and I'm the target market for this. I'm a retro gamer. I own Ataris from back in the 70s and 80s. Like I am the target market for this machine. And I looked at it and I was just like, I am not plonking down near $900 for this machine. So I'm curious to see what everyone else is saying about it. And the sentiment in Australia alone was so negative. And it was basically along the same lines. It was, I have fond memories of this brand. I have fond memories of the original machines. Um, I am the target market, but I am not going to pay for this machine.
Right. So is this an example of an iconic brand that's really still trying to trade on the past? Because, as you say, there's these powerful consoles, the PlayStations, the
Mm.
Xboxes. Whereas Atari, when I think about Atari in 2020, I just really think about their classic logo. It looked good on a
Yeah,
piece of apparel or something, but I don't
yeah,
actually,
and
you know,
that's pretty much what Atari has been for the last 10 years. Has been a logo plastered on apparel and merchandise and things like that.
yeah.
Um, what I genuinely think it is it's you can trade on nostalgia, but you have to get that balance right of what people are willing to pay for it in return for what they're getting. Like, look, I will go and pay $20 to $30 for a cool retro T-shirt any day of the week if it's a good design, if it's a game that I love. You give me a good Sonic the Hedgehog T-shirt for $20, I'll buy it, right? Um, but you put that same Sonic logo on a higher quality T-shirt and try and charge me $90 for it, I am not going to do it. And it's the same as if you release an Atari flashback machine, which is going to cost, I don't know, $80, which they have done, right? It's literally a plug and play Atari machine that plays all the old games. $80, that's probably in that balance of where I would roughly pay for it, which is pretty much what Nintendo and Sega did. But you try and give me something resembling retro for almost $900, and I'm just going, no, that balance is completely off. You're wrong. You have misjudged nostalgia, the power of nostalgia.
So how does one avoid misjudging nostalgia? Because there's lots of creators or companies out there that are
Mm,
sitting on a terrible term, intellectual property. There's probably a better
mm.
term than intellectual property. Just picking something that's a bit old and dusty now and saying, well, this is old, it's from the 80s, therefore people will love it. It's probably not enough, really, is it?
Um, I think, look, I think it does come down to, um, do people have a positive affinity to that brand, and what are they getting in return for the price? But
Mm.
I still don't think there's any negative in trading on nostalgia.
Yeah, well,
Coca-Cola in the 80s massively did it. In the 80s, Coca-Cola used to were releasing cans with retro advertising on the side of it as limited edition cans, and people gobbled those up because they were cool.
yeah, I noticed.
And Coke is a brand that they know nostalgia well. They know that people have a positive affinity to that brand from their childhood.
Yeah, I think Pepsi, maybe they copied Coke, but I think they did the same thing as well. They
They did.
re-released their old,
Hmm.
well, the designs of their old cans on
Yeah.
the mini cans. So this is something I was thinking about. I mean, 2020 has been a bit of a rough year
As I hadn't noticed.
for for a lot of people, and nostalgia. I'm glad you said there's nothing wrong in trading in nostalgia, because I just think to attack nostalgia, it almost seems Grinch-like. Like
Mm.
I know there was that classic South Park episode where they actually made fun of nostalgia. They had those little characters called
Oh,
member
the
berries,
member berries. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've used that GIF so many times. Remember? Remember?
which
Yeah.
I think was making fun of the whole nostalgia thing.
Yeah. It was funny because a lot of people, South Park's been around for so long now that it's entering a nostalgia stage.
Right. So you could be nostalgic for the first season of South Park rather than, I don't know,
100%
what's
you
it
could
up
be.
to, season 20
I think
something or.
it is. It is. It's right up there. But yeah, like it's definitely entering that stage of nostalgia. Like The Simpsons is definitely doing it too. I know people that don't acknowledge the last 10 years of The Simpsons.
Yeah, my daughters, they signed on to Disney Plus, and they nearly passed out when they saw that every season of The Simpsons was on there. And
Yeah.
like it was a frightening amount of seasons.
Yeah. How
And
long is it going to take you to catch up on that show?
and I just sounded like the old man sitting on his rocking chair on the porch, explaining to them what the good seasons of The Simpsons were, like from my
Yeah.
point of view.
Yeah.
And I thought I mounted a reasonable argument, but anyway.
Yeah.
I guess I had a vested interest where I didn't really want them to watch 30 seasons, like maybe watch 3 or 4 seasons.
Yeah. I think if I was going to say it, it's almost like season three up until the movie.
Wow, that's still a lot of seasons.
There's still a lot of seasons, but I reckon it was after the movie where
Yeah.
they sort of lost sight of what that show was.
Yeah, so I have a lot of fond memories of The Simpsons from season 3 onwards, maybe through to season 6 or 7, and then I lost touch with it. And then
Yeah.
many years later, a movie came out which you referenced, and I went to the cinema to see that, and I was like, wow, this is actually really good. It reminds me of The
It
Simpsons
was a good movie.
I used I used to enjoy watching. So
But then there's things that this is the negative side of nostalgia, is a lot of things don't live up to your memories.
yeah,
Um,
yes,
so like I've got, like I said, I collect video games, and there's a lot of the time I'll go, oh shit, I haven't played this game in years. I'll buy it, I'll take it home and play it, and what I remember that experience of playing that game being like is nothing like what it is now to play. Like it doesn't look as good as I remember it looking. It doesn't play as good as I remember it playing, and I'm not having as much fun as I did when I was a kid. And that sometimes it's better sitting in that sort of, maybe this was better as a memory sort of situation. And it's the same with TV shows. Like I can remember really enjoying Friends when I was young.
yeah, that was wildly popular.
Yeah, but the thing is, I've gone back and attempted to rewatch Friends, and I do not like it anymore. Like, I just don't like that comedy anymore. It just hasn't lived up, in my opinion. That's me, and I know there's a lot of Friends fans out there that are probably going to comment on this podcast and say, no, Phid's wrong. Friends is amazing.
Yeah, so please, if anyone is listening to this, we welcome angry comments about Friends. Please re-educate us. But that's interesting because comedy, I feel, comedy's been around for a long time, but I feel that comedy, I don't want to use the term innovation in comedy, but I think comedy may have gotten better and better. Like,
I think it definitely has. Do you know what I honestly believe comedy has gotten more intelligent in the last 5 years. And I think it's because as a world we've become a lot more aware of things that offend other people and things like that. Like you go back and watch comedy from the 70s and 80s, stand-up comedy, like especially some of the old Eddie Murphy stuff and things like that. A lot of it is really lowbrow offensive stuff now.
yeah,
Like there is no way you would be using that comedy, a lot of it now.
no,
Um, and at first, a lot of comedians, when sort of the world sort of started changing, took offense to that change, right? And it was like, well, no, comedy is comedy. We should be allowed to say what we want. If you don't find it funny, watch something else. Kevin Hart was a good example of that. Like he went through a lot of it. Chappelle is another
yes,
one who a lot of his stuff hasn't sort of lived up to time, and he in the last year or so has started not apologizing for it, but sort of saying, "I wouldn't do that same stuff now." And so I think I hold him up as one of the greatest comics of all time. I
I
don't know if you
agree.
know, I've done quite a bit of work with comedians and stuff in the past, so
Oh,
um,
really?
I've
So you're a
watched.
comedy specialist too?
I'm not a comedy specialist at all. I've just got friends that are stand-up comics, so watching them hone their craft and change their craft and become smarter about their comedy. And but as a viewer of comedy now, sometimes you're forced to think as well. So look at the Daily Show and
Mm.
John Oliver with Last Week Tonight and stuff like that. Like a lot of their comedy is better than the news. It's more educational than the news. John Oliver especially.
Yeah,
You
so
watch his stuff and you get a laugh. You get to laugh at how stupid particular country's leadership is, and but you're also educated on how shitty some things are in the world. But yeah, I also
yes,
think comedy. So sorry to cut you off.
it's okay. No, please.
I also think comedy is interesting to go back and look at though, because I think it's a good snapshot of the world at the time.
Yeah, well, going back to 2020, and it feels like a grind, but there's sort of an absurdist aspect to the current times we're living in as well,
Yeah,
and I, I imagine that's challenging for comedians because they're not competing with other comedians; they're actually competing with reality, which is actually kind of weird
yeah.
at
Could
the
you
moment.
imagine being a political comedian at the moment?
Yeah, it would
It's
be
like
very difficult.
reality at the moment is almost comedic itself. Some
Yeah,
of the stuff
it's
that, look, I'm just going to say, I don't know if you like politics on your show or not, but I think a lot of stuff that Trump is doing is just so ridiculous. You would imagine a comedian coming up with it 10 years ago.
Yeah, so the lot of the stuff he does, it's ridiculous, it's offensive, and like it really grates on you like nails against a blackboard. But there's some strange performative aspect to it as well, and that's what I was saying. The
Oh,
comedians are
100%.
competing with it.
They're competing with reality. It's got to be difficult. A really good friend, one of my closest friends actually, is a stand-up comedian, and we have some pretty deep conversations about some of the shit that's going on in the world, but also his material. He'll go, "Hey, I've got an idea," and he'll spin it past me and stuff. And that's how hard the work is that they're putting in. Is they're actually like once upon a time you'd just go and do a stand-up show, test out the material. Okay, that worked, that didn't land, whatever. But now they're putting a lot of thought into delivery and is this a good topic to even be talking about? Or if I am going to approach this topic, how should I approach it? One of the stand-up shows he was getting ready to put out into the world before coronavirus happened was the entire show that he'd written was around being a toxic man
Oh wow.
and sort of looking at his own toxicity back in the day and acknowledging that and having a laugh about some of it. But yeah, I thought it was super interesting because it's a current subject as men. We're having to analyze our own toxicity around each other, our own toxic attitudes towards females, our own toxic attitudes towards different genders or whatever.
Yeah, so
Men are in a really interesting place of growth at the moment.
I think we're all
Hopefully,
feeling
growth.
it.
Most of us should be growing.
I agree. Linking that back to nostalgia, you're referring to comedians of the past, their past sets, like, for
Yeah,
instance, Eddie Murphy, and
yeah.
some of it's quite lowbrow. I mean, I don't know Eddie Murphy. It wouldn't surprise me if you knew him, being the comedy specialist you are. But the impression I get is he does not revel in his past success, and it even feels reticent about some of his past
Yeah. He
material.
has, yeah, he has come out and sort of said, like, I'm embarrassed about some of the stuff that he did.
Yeah,
And he
so
won't redo those, and we won't redo those jokes.
so I guess nostalgia is easily misunderstood, isn't it? Because they might take offense to something because they feel like political correctness has gone too far or whatever it is. But just because something is old and successful doesn't mean necessarily good either. Like, it's just not
Oh,
going to fly
exactly.
in 2020.
Hey, look, Mein Kampf was a successful book. Right?
Yeah, and Leni Riefenstahl was a successful filmmaker too.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. But it's a sort of fact, right? Just because something's successful doesn't mean it was a good thing. I know there's plenty of successful YouTubers out there that shouldn't have a platform.
a favorite term of mine is weaponized, like things being weaponized.
Mm.
So nostalgia could probably be weaponized, I suppose, and it has
Oh,
been.
I
Yeah,
think it definitely has been, especially, look, to go back to politics, I think currently in America, nostalgia is 100% being weaponized at the moment. It's being used as a, hey, do you remember when America was great? And if you have a look at it, it's like, has America actually been great? The history doesn't say so, but it's the nostalgia that they're leaning into for a lot of white Americans who lived in a bubble back then and could be oblivious to some of the horrible things that were happening on in their country because it wasn't their reality, so they either one ignored it or they may not have even known about it.
so
So they're definitely
yeah,
weaponizing that nostalgia.
so nostalgia can be easily weaponized because it's seductive, because it's calling us back to what we thought
A
was a
better time.
happier time. And in 2020, there's a lot of people suffering, economically, health wise, all sorts of things.
And it's not just that they're just suffering. It's a lot of what's happened in the last year has just more been a case of people standing up for the suffering their people have had since forever. And it's not. I've seen this commented a lot as, "Oh, why are people so sensitive now? Back in the day, we used to be able to." And it's like, well, no, it was never okay then. It's more a case of people are just not taking that shit anymore.
Yeah. So the opposite of weaponizing nostalgia, like, obviously we want a better world. We would actually like to create a world where people, when we get through the other side of 2020 or whatever's on the other side, that people in the future would look back on and go, okay, that, they got their shit together. That wasn't that bad. What's the opposite of weaponizing nostalgia? Are there things from the past that we feel nostalgic about, but we can bring forward to help us now in 2020?
Look, I don't even know how you would, what word you would use for it, apart from, there's that old phrase, learning from our mistakes of, we don't know where we've been. How are we expected to move forward? But a good example I'll give you on this one is I grew up a massive hip hop fan, massive. I was into gangster rap, you name it. And I have very positive memories of listening to the likes of DMX, was a super popular rapper in the 90s and the early 2000s. But if you go back and have a listen to his music, he was homophobic, he was sexist, he was all of that. And a lot of that was absolutely fine back then, right? It
Right.
was accepted. It was something that was completely tolerated. It wasn't fine, but it was tolerated. And I've gone back and listened to his music and actually literally cringed at some of the lyrics. And a couple of his songs and gone, look, I'm glad to see that as a entertainment form, we're starting to see some movement in it. The likes of Logic, who recently retired, but a great modern rapper who has done what he did without using, I think he's used the N-bomb once, you know, because he's learned that's not okay. I don't want my people using that word. He's acknowledged suicide as being a problem with people, a problem, and written an entire song about, reaching out for help and things like that. So I think learning from the past is probably the opposite.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to look at a piece of art? It could be music, could be a song, could be a movie,
Hmm.
could be a video game, bringing it back to
Yeah.
the start of our conversation. And based on what you know now, look at that and go, I actually think people will feel fondly about this thing I'm looking at in 20 to 30 years' time. Do you think that's even possible?
I think so. I do think so. Look, I was never around in the days of Pong, right? I was way too young to when that came out, but I look back at that with fondness. But
Mm.
it's probably because of the industry I'm in. I look at that as being a key point in the industry that created what we have now. I do it with music. I love like Frank Sinatra and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think we do look back on, but I think it's more it's people that in the future that will look back at the stuff that we grew up on or whatever. It's going to be judged on the merit or its importance.
Yeah, I was trying to unpack this for myself because when I was watching that Netflix show High Score, before there was any footage, there was just the credits, which were animated in an
Oh,
old,
they were amazing, weren't they?
I guess you'd call it an 8-bit graphic style.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
And as soon as I
pixel
saw
art.
that,
It's called pixel art.
oh, pixel art, as soon as I saw
Yeah.
that pixel art in motion, which was created uniquely for the show, like the nostalgia kicked in already because, that's what games looked like when I was
Hmm.
just a small child. And like I look at games today and they're so realistic, they're so smooth,
Oh man.
like, and they're creating it in real time. Because the CPUs and the graphics hardware are just so powerful, and the,
Yeah.
the video
And being
displays.
being able to and being able to interact with other people who are somewhere else in the world playing that same game at the same time as you and things like
Yeah,
that. It's just
yes. So, I mean, because of the advance in technology, the advance in graphics capability, there seems to be a hard line between a certain age of video games and the later age. And you look back on let's call them the pixel art games, the
yeah.
sprites. But looking at games today, graphically, they're so good. Like, would that make it harder to identify a game today that you would say, oh, this game will actually be viewed as a classic in 20 years' time?
Oh, look, I think what it's going to come down to is the importance of that game on the future of gaming. To use gaming as a prime example here, it's like Fortnite, right? Fortnite graphically isn't a superior game. It's a very simplistic graphic style, but it's going to be seen as a super important part of our industry and in the medium of games because of it fundamentally changed the way video games are played. The fact that it's a free video game, it's completely free. If you've got a PlayStation or an Xbox or a PC, you can download that game for free and play it today. First people to really do that in a good way, and the way that they make money is by skins, which is just different clothing or different looking aspects to your character. It doesn't improve the way you play at all. At all. Everybody who downloads that game starts off on equal footing as everyone else on that game, statistically, like with the way that the characters work and stuff. It's just more a skill level of someone who's been playing for 2 years is going to be better than someone who's played for 20 minutes. So I think people will look back on that as being super important. The same way that I know people that in the fighting game community now look back at Street Fighter 2 as being an iconic, super important game in the fighting game community. They may never have played that game as a kid because they were born in the early 2000s, but they know how important that game was to create the genre that they love now.
So, a loaded question, but what has a better reputation from a nostalgia point of view, Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat?
Oh, okay. This is a really interesting one. I would say Street Fighter 2 because it came out first and inspired Mortal Kombat. And I would say, arguably, there's more people that played Street Fighter 2 in arcades than played Mortal Kombat in arcades. And that's where if the people that have a nostalgic feeling towards that particular game usually have it because it was an arcade game they played.
Right.
Yeah. And it's still a game that gets re-released on every console that ever comes out.
Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat?
Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
Street Fighter 2 will get re-released, whereas Mortal Kombat will get a new version of Mortal Kombat. So they're up to like Mortal Kombat 11 now. Whereas they're only up to Street Fighter 5.
Yeah, I'm really interested in aesthetics, and I know this is subjective, but
Totally.
not that I'm a fighting game specialist, but when I look at Street Fighter 2 and the designs of the characters and the thinking about those characters, to my eye, they appear to be characters that have greater longevity because Mortal Kombat was just literally digitizing actors as the characters. Does that make sense?
I think, it's definitely, I think, the character design of Street Fighter characters were a lot more timeless. And if you have a look at a Mortal Kombat game, it's the look of and dress sense and all that has aged.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Are there any?
Which is why in the later versions of Mortal Kombat games, right, we're up to Mortal Kombat 11, those characters look nothing like they did in Mortal Kombat 1.
Okay, so they're completely different.
Whereas Street Fighter 5 characters still resemble the same characters we played on Street Fighter 2. Like Ryu, if you ever look at that character Ryu, he's still wearing the red gi. He's still got the blonde hair. I think it's long now though, right?
Right, yeah.
He still does exactly the same moves. He's still barefoot. All those same design elements are still there. They've just tweaked it and updated it.
Yeah, who was the character that looked like a monster, like a green monster or something?
Oh, was Balrog.
That was a hidden quiz. Just seeing if you got the name right.
Was it Balrog? No, it wasn't Balrog.
I wouldn't know. I just know what he looks like.
No, that was...
It's all right.
It's
look, we can find... What we'll do, we can actually find the name and put it in the show notes because this is quite important and I wouldn't want someone to listen to this and then not be able to go to sleep at night. But based on what you're saying, just looking at a game is not enough to predict whether, it's going to be a classic in a few decades' time. It's actually like game mechanics as well. Like you use the example of Fortnite. In that show, High Score, they used the example of Doom. It was an early shareware game or something where people could get the first part free and then they had to pay for the second parts of it. But they could play each other online as well over a modem, a dial-up modem.
Doom's actually a prime example of a game that has... so there's two factors here. One is people will always look back at that original Doom game as being super important to the industry. It was the first massively popular first-person shooter. It wasn't the first-person shooter, but they definitely changed the game with that one. And every other shooter game, like right up until today, with Call of Duty, still has elements that were established in that game. But the other big one is they broke the record of being the only game ever, or the only piece of software to ever be installed on more computers than Windows 95 at the time.
Really?
And more people had Doom than had Windows 95.
So for that to work, they were running it on PCs with earlier operating systems, like DOS or something.
It was either running on DOS or Windows 2.0 or one of the alternative operating systems.
Yeah, I remember.
But the other point I was going to make, is but Doom is massively capitalized on their nostalgia too.
Right.
Doom, they are still releasing Doom games, and they are bloody good, the new ones. But as a part of that, they've got secret levels in there that look like the original levels. They've still kept elements from that original game, like the main gun in it is still the BFG.
I always think of the Roald Dahl book when I hear BFG.
Yeah, but in Doom it stands for Big Effing Gun.
Yeah. I do remember playing Doom's predecessor, on a very
Wolfenstein.
early PC, and it was very addictive. And I
Do you know?
see, yeah.
Here's a weird nostalgia question. I'll ask you this one because it's one that stumps me still to this day.
Mm.
Is what was your first ever gaming memory? Like, what's the first video game you ever
Oh,
played?
I think it was a handheld game. Do you remember what handheld games were?
Yeah, like the old. There was like the Nintendo Game and Watches, and there were the Tiger handhelds, and
Yeah, this was like before that. It was a weird thing. My father had come back from the States. He'd bought this thing for me. It was called Master Blaster or something, and it looked like a
I'm
white
going to show you
rocket.
something.
Okay,
I'm going to show you
please
something here.
blow my mind with your nostalgia.
Was it something like this?
You know, that is awesome what you're showing me, but it was actually more
Yeah.
compact than that. It was sort of elongated like a rocket and lower profile, and it was
Okay.
white, and you'd hold it in both hands. But it was simply, there was just simply like a rocket or something, and you were firing at, I don't know if it was asteroids or something, but it was
Yeah.
just a tiny LCD screen. That was
Yeah.
my first memory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very similar to the Tigers and the Nintendo Game and Watches. The Nintendo Game and Watch was an LCD handheld that was
that's
around
right.
before they even did NES, before they did any consoles. That was their first foray into gaming.
That's right. And they got really advanced by having like a clamshell one, didn't they? Where you'd open it up
Yeah,
and there were two screens.
which went on to inspire the Nintendo DS years later.
Ah. Yeah, I remember like at school, if someone had one of those, the double screen ones, it was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and those things there, like for an unboxed one in shitty condition, you can get like $80 for that. If you've got a fully in-box mint condition one, you can get like $500 for those now. They're worth a
Really?
pretty penny. Yeah.
Wow. So is there anything I haven't covered with nostalgia, Fid? You're my nostalgia
Oh,
specialist.
I honestly, I think we've been over a lot of the topics. I just think, yeah, I, the big thing with nostalgia is I personally love nostalgia as a thing. It doesn't matter what brand you are. If you're an old brand that's been around for years and is super iconic, you can probably capitalize on a bit of that nostalgia. Like, even if you had to think about almost anything in your house that's an iconic brand, if they released a retro packaging for it, you'd probably go out and buy it.
Yeah, so that could be a kitchen appliance or anything, couldn't it?
Yeah, well, look, I can remember, would have been about 10 years ago. Sanitarium released a Weet-Bix tin that looked like the old Weet-Bix container. So you bought your Weet-Bix and it came with this free tin. And I can remember buying it because I wanted that tin because it looked like the Weet-Bix tin from when I was a kid.
Classic.
Yeah. And so nostalgia is so powerful, and people will definitely plonk down cash for nostalgia. It's just getting that balance right.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Fid. Something else that I feel a strong sense of nostalgia for is just random casual conversations. I mean,
Yeah.
since lockdown, since the COVID situation, we're all working from home, obviously. But the incidental conversations, I really miss them. So just having this conversation with you,
Yeah.
I feel a sense of nostalgia. But it's
So
good. It's good nostalgia.
how long have you and I worked together for now? Be
Uh,
almost three
prob
years.
Yeah, 4 years, I would say.
Yeah. It's been a long time, and like I would say, the biggest thing I am missing in 2020 is interaction with other people and my friends and my colleagues at work, and I miss the time in the office chatting with the likes of you, which I would honestly say 90% of the conversations you and I have ever had in our office have not been about work. It's been us just casually catching up either in the smoko area or me coming over to sit by you at your desk and just talking shit. And that's what I really miss.
Yeah, same here, buddy. And I really appreciate the time you've made to catch up
Oh,
again.
mate, I will. If you want me either back on your show or if you just want to Skype call one day just to talk,
So,
you know where to
Fid,
get me.
thank you, Fid. So, Fid McAwesome, if people are listening to our conversation and they think, wow, Fid really is a nostalgia specialist and a gaming specialist, a
Yeah.
comedy specialist and a music industry specialist, where can they find you? Where's the best place to find
Okay.
you?
You can find me on everything at Phid McAwesome. So Twitter, Instagram, I think it's Twitch if you want to catch my very random live streams, which I don't do very often. Funnily enough, my live stream I do on Twitch are usually all retro gaming ones as well, so that's a bit of a nostalgia thing. But also every week we do a show on Go to Game, which is the company I run. Myself and one of my colleagues, Jack, we catch up over Zoom once a week and bring in another person from the gaming industry, and we just have a chat. That goes out every week on our Facebook page and our YouTube account. So if you just look up goto.game for that. If anyone's interested in checking out more about Go to Game, you can check us out www.goto.game as well.
Excellent, thank you, Phid.
Oh, actually, I'm gonna
Yes.
pimp one more thing, only because I'm really trying to get more followers for this.
Do it.
Is my wife and I started an Instagram account covering our cooking adventures since we've been in lockdown.
Okay,
during
so
coronavirus.
you're a culinary specialist too.
Well,
You and your
no,
wife.
we have started learning how to cook foods that we have never even attempted, all because I formed an addiction to the YouTube channel Bon Appetit over lockdown. So we've started at McAwesome Kai on Instagram.
Excellent. I will put
all of our food.
I will put links to all parts of your media empire in the show notes of this podcast. So
Appreciate it.
Phid McAwesome, thank you for your time.
Not a problem. Thank you. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to Timbo Talks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. Alternatively, please use your favourite podcast app to find Timbo Talks. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram as Timbo Horan, TimboHoran. Until next time.